All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode number 3 of the new podcast here on the channel. Now, first things first, let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room. What the hell is the name of this podcast? I don't know yet. So I've been looking at a lot of comments from the last 2 episodes, and I've gotten a few that I feel like can be suitable, titles for the podcast. And I'm going to kind of put them in here right now, and I want you guys to vote on, just which one you guys think would suit the podcast the best, because you guys are in full control, and I want you guys to pick the name because this is a community-based podcast in the first place. So let's go ahead and go through some of these names. Obviously, there is the first one here, the King Japes podcast. That's solid. I think that's something that I can run with. Then there's also Frame Up, which, got a lot of upvotes in the recent podcasts. I think Frame Up sounds pretty cool. So that's another option here. Let me see, what else do we have? We also have Full Frame. That sounds very photography based. Full Frame podcast. Not bad. I like that as well. So we'll add that through, into the list here. Through the Lens. That's another great one. And then, one of the last ones here is Japes Tapes or Minolta Gang podcast. I'm going to leave a pinned comment in the comment section down below. And then whichever one has the most votes, we will go ahead and proceed with that name moving forward. Like I said, you guys are in control. And that is how we are going to decide the title of this podcast. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode number 3. I hope you guys have had a great week so far. We are currently recording on Tuesday, June 12th. And the topic for today's episode came from a question on Instagram. I, most of the time throughout the week, will post up, these different cards where you guys can ask me questions, whether it's street photography related, personal life related, whatever. And I answer them on my stories. And so if you guys aren't following me over on Instagram, check me out on Instagram. It's the same title and everything, King Japes. And you guys can participate in that as well. But one of the questions that I got today was, how do you create a body of work? And I think this is something that is different for a lot of people. And the process is something that you really can just make your own. But in today's episode, I wanted to talk about my process at least, and talk a little bit more in depth about how I come up with an idea for, a body of work, or how I just go about executing, how I choose gear for it. And then I will take you guys through that entire process. And hopefully by the end of it, you guys can get a better understanding of how I do it. And hopefully one of these things, or a few of these things, can, help you out creating your own body of work. So yeah, I don't think this is going to be a super long episode. It might be a shorty, but quickie. That sounds terrible. And hopefully it's one that's packed with information. But okay, let's go ahead and get started. So the thing about creating a body of work is that you need, in my opinion at least, folks, you don't need to look at the entire thing as a whole, especially because bodies of work can seem extremely overwhelming. You're going to be creating not singular photos or individual pieces. You're going to be creating something that has to kind of mesh together. Now, whether that be, again, like a singular idea or a theme, or just a collection of photographs, whatever it may be, it can be overwhelming. And so the first step that I take when I create a body of work is I ask myself, what is the intent behind creating this piece? Am I doing this to create a collection of photographs for a zine? Or am I doing this, purely out of the joy of making photographs? Because bodies of work seem like they have almost an end goal. And if you can kind of identify what your intentions are to create a body of work, it can help you go about deciding, how you're going to actually put this piece together. So typically when I create a body of work, I tend to look at them as like photo essays. There will be a specific theme, whether that be like, if it's me focusing on a city like San Francisco, or if it's me focusing on crosswalks within that city, or my Philippines body of work, obviously it was just all photographs from the Philippines. These were all kind of ideas that I didn't necessarily think about at first, but they became an afterthought after I found a common pattern. So, the first thing that I would do is, if you don't have an idea of a certain theme or body of work that you want to put together, one thing you can do is just look back at all of the photographs that you've already taken, because I can guarantee that every photographer out there, has a collection of photographs within their camera roll or in their archives that, they can put together a body of work just from the photographs that you've already made. So that's something that I do. If I go out, let's say to Yosemite, and I shoot 5 rolls of film, I come back and I look at the photographs. Obviously, that in itself is a body of work. I can title it Yosemite, and it'll be photographs from, the park. With that said, looking back at some of my older street photography, even if it's something as simple as like black and white only, that can be a theme. So for me, I like to look at my photos after. I don't really shoot with the intent of trying to create a theme or body of work while I'm out on the streets, because when you go out to shoot any type of photography and you have this almost preconceived idea of the theme that you're trying to make, that is a lot of pressure. That, you're going to try to make photographs that fit that theme, and you're going to be extremely picky with your photographs. Not to say that's a bad thing, but at the same time, it limits the amount of photos that you make because you're kind of fixating on this one idea. Now, generally, once that idea does come to me, let's say I recognize a theme, like for example, in my crosswalk zine, I noticed that I always made photos at the crosswalks in San Francisco. I would take my camera and I would literally I would stand and kind of wait at each of these crosswalks until the light turned green and we can start walking across the street. And I would photograph the people walking through, because there was a split second of time within, them just going from one sidewalk to the other where there were special moments. Maybe it's someone, a child running with a balloon, or it's a bicyclist kind of going in front of a street performer. All of these crazy moments I noticed were happening in between that time it took from one person to walk from sidewalk to sidewalk. And so after I figured out that pattern, that was when I went ahead and started to go fixate on, the crosswalks. So, look for a pattern, look for a theme that you see a lot in your photography. And if it's something that you like, or if it's something that you could, potentially kind of move forward with, you can definitely use that as a theme, but it doesn't need to always be this way. Again, folks, you can just look at your photographs and just make a collection. So hopefully that helps in terms of answering the question, how do I create a theme or a body of work based around a certain idea? If you have a certain idea though that you want to, shed light on, for example, if you like photographing old doors, that's great. You can, do a lot of macro detail shots on some doors. I've seen people do it on cars. I've seen people, have ideas to do in Oakland, they have these things called sideshows for the Bay Area listeners. I forgot we're on video here. For the Bay Area listeners, man, there's some photographers out there who photograph sideshows. They go out there and they do their thing. Cars 2 feet drifting away, doing donuts in front of them. That's just what they do. And it's great. There's a lot of action shots to that. Anything that you find interesting can be an idea or theme for your next body of work. Now, once you kind of establish your intent for why you want to create a body of work, the next part, of course, is just going out to execute. And okay, there's an alarm going off in the background here. Execution during a body of work can be however you want it to be. Like I said, it could just be you going through your old archives and finding a theme within that. Or you could do what I do. And generally, I will set a specific amount of time. Generally, it's a couple of months. I said generally twice there. it's usually a couple of months, maybe 6 months to a year, where I will go out and try to, photograph with that theme in mind. And I know I said, maybe you shouldn't have a preconceived theme in your head before you go out to shoot because you're going to fixate on that, which I believe still is true. But once I've identified that theme and, what you're trying to do with it, you always want to add to that theme. That was just going to say, if you don't have a theme just yet, maybe not do it. Maybe don't go out there and shoot with a theme. But if you already have that theme and you know what your intent is with it, then you can go out there and make more photographs to kind of fit that body of work. So, crosswalk took me about 6 to 8 months, roughly. Philippines, I was only there for 2 weeks. I made that entire body of work in the 2 week span of time. Now the most recent one, which was hiatus took 2 years to make, over 600 photos. And I had to really select and curate the ones that I feel like were going to fit. Because it was, over this course of the pandemic, obviously. So, set yourself an amount of time. This gives you some type of structure to follow. It could be a couple of weeks, a couple of days, a couple of months, or it could be a couple of years, whatever you guys feel like is best. And whenever you feel satisfied with the amount of photographs that you've taken, you can go ahead and move on to the next step. Now, a couple of tips for execution, though, folks, is selecting gear. Something that I pride myself on doing is I will pick pieces of gear to use that give a very similar look and feel. You don't always need to do this. I do this for consistency reasons, because I want every photograph to look like it was taken from how I see it. But I completely understand if you want to go out with a 50 millimeter lens and then the next day you're going to go out with a 70 to 200, you can do that. Whatever it takes to get the desired images that you want to create, do it. Gear at this point does not matter. It's off the table. But for consistency reasons, personally for me, I will select a piece of gear that I think is, something that I can rely on that's really consistent, but it's something that will give me a similar feel and look in every photograph. So, Crosswalk was done with the M2 and a 35 millimeter lens. Philippines was done mostly on the Bessa R2A and a couple of shots from the GR3 or GR2. And then the hiatus Zine was done mostly on just all film, and then a couple of medium format shots from the Pentax 6.7. With that said, again, use whatever you have. If you're going to be shooting with an iPhone, shoot with an iPhone. If you're going to be shooting with a point and shoot, shoot with a point and shoot. It does not matter, folks. At the end of the day, a body of work is to show and showcase the moments that you captured while you were out there, not necessarily the gear that you're using. So definitely keep that in mind. There's one thing, though, that I do want to mention, and that is color bodies of work and black and white bodies of work, because I think both can definitely be, you can definitely have both in the same body of work, because I literally just did that with hiatus. The first half of hiatus was black and white because that was the original project. The second half was all color. But for a lot of people, when you're shooting, for example, let's say in color, and this is something that you have to think of as well. When you're making photos, your mind is always thinking about the end result. And so if you are thinking about, let's say you're shooting color film. If you're shooting color film, your mind is thinking in color. You're going to look for colors that are complementary. You're going to think about the different hues of light. Maybe you're going to be, deciding when to shoot because you might get different light at different times of day, like at golden hour or at blue hour. Your mind is going to be thinking in terms of color. And so that greatly affects the way your images look. And so if you're going to be photographing, let's say on the other end of the spectrum with black and white, your photographs are going to be a lot more composition based or a lot more emotion based, because once you take that color away, these are all the things that you need to focus on. Pure photography, what you see on the screen is what you get, or I should say on the negative, right? And so figure out, what you are going to shoot. You can shoot both, but just know at the end of the day, whatever you choose, whether it be black and white or color, it's going to adversely affect the way you look at the world and the way you capture images. And if you think that this body of work is going to be better on black and white film, just do it on black and white. Do whatever you feel like your heart tells you to do, what your eyes, want you to do. Especially if it's something that can draw emotion. Let's say, you're making photos of, let's say you're doing a body of work on civil servants, and you're taking photos of police officers, of them smiling, of their everyday life. Maybe it's a group of construction workers eating lunch. These are all things you can think about. And it's all things that can influence your decision on whether you shoot, black and white or color. So the last step, folks, about creating a body of work, you got the idea down, you got the theme. Maybe you do, or maybe you don't. Once you move on from that, folks, you get into the execution phase. And then you start making photographs. You set yourself a time limit of when you want to be able to finish this body of work. And let's say you're at a good point where you feel like you have enough photographs to where you can, almost create this body of work and put it out into the world. The last step, folks, is putting it all together. Now, putting it together is, in my opinion, the easiest, but also the hardest part about creating a body of work. It's extremely easy because you can just look at all of your photographs and kind of pick which ones you like. It's simple, you know what I mean? Maybe this one is really good for the theme. Maybe this one isn't. You're just judging your own photos. But where things get tough is having to lay them out. And this goes back to your end goal. Are you going to be making a zine from this body of work? Or are you just going to be making an album, where you have this album with a ton of different photographs and it's just a standalone body of work? It gets even harder. Are you going to do an exhibition? Are you going to do a gallery show with this body of work? Because once you put it on paper and you're presenting it to the world in a formal, almost like in a formal way, like you're going to be publishing a zine or something, or a book, you really need to start to think about the layout. And laying out photographs is extremely tough because you might want to have photos that, kind of have similar themes and similar feels. You want to be able to make a lot of sense by putting two photos next to each other, why you chose to curate it in that order or in that fashion. And as a photographer, personally speaking, it's always been really hard for me to lay photographs out because what I don't want to happen is I put a photo down on the left side of the paper, and then on the right side, it's a photo that's just something extremely random. And then the overall spread just doesn't look that great. Because now with a body of work, and especially if you are putting it on paper or anything that's permanent, now you're not worrying about individual images. You're worrying about how your entire spread looks. From start to the body to the ending. All of these, different structures are going to influence how you put your photos in kind of, the order that you want them to be. It doesn't make sense, just like in any movie, right? It doesn't make sense to have the ending in the beginning, or, to have, it could, right? It could. There's no rules. That's the one thing too about bodies of work and zines or anything like that. There are no rules. You can break them. I suggest you break them. Change it, Let's get away from this traditional stuff. But yeah, there's no rules. You can choose to have your bangers up front and then slowly kind of draw it out into photographs that, you don't feel, well, obviously you feel happy about them, but, you don't think are going to be, or as impactful as it may, the first few may be, excuse me. Or you can just, go the regular route of possibly starting out with photos that are safe, maybe introducing the theme early on, and then towards the middle you get to the nitty gritty stuff, and you start to show all of this amazing work. And then towards the end you could just throw your banger out there, because at the end of it you are making a finished product, whether it be a digital album or a physical album. And the sequence in which you put your photos in is extremely important to the end product. The process that I personally take, and I'm speaking only for when I am making a zine, is I will go grab 4x6 prints of all of the photographs from this body of work, whether that be 20 or whether that be 600. I will print out 4x6s of them. And you can do this very inexpensively. There are drugstores like Walmart, CVS, Walgreens that have those little kiosks. Get them printed out, because there's a difference in seeing them on your screen in these smaller thumbnails than seeing all the photographs up close in person. You get a better understanding of how the images look printed and how they feel in person. So after I get these 4x6 prints, I will go to this island right here behind me, and I will lay each of the photos out. And the first thing that I will do is I will make my picks. Making picks essentially just means I will go through each of the photographs in no particular order and make two piles: the good pile and the bad pile. The good pile it's just all a process of elimination at this point. And depending on how big you want your body of work to be, especially if you have constraints like a zine where you can only do so many pages, you might want to narrow that down even more and go through a couple of rounds of good and bad. So I'll do that until I feel confident with the pictures that I think all kind of mesh and look good together. Now, once that is done, the last step, folks, is sequencing. Putting photographs that I feel like work well together. If this photograph and, there's photograph A and there's photograph B, let's say A has a nice complementary color to photograph B, I'm going to pair those up together. They're going to be on the same page or on the same spread. On the other hand, if there is two black and white photos that have some type of duality, let's say they're both super contrasty and, great composition, lots of great leading lines. If I see two leading lines right next to each other, that's going to be a good, piece of, it'll be a good piece to the eye. And so I will put that in together. All of these little things, folks, it's completely up to you how you sequence, how you, decide what photographs to put together. It's all up to you. You don't need to follow any rule here. My best advice is just to go with what feels right, because at the end of it, this is your body of work, and this is something that you're putting together on your time, and you don't want to try to cater to anyone else but yourself at this time. Because again, folks, it's your body of work. It's special to you. Now, that is kind of the end of creating a body of work. After you create this body of work, you can do whatever you want with it. Like I said, there's finished products like books. You can make zines. You can make just prints to have around your place. You can do gallery shows. You can do absolutely anything that you want. But in terms of creating a body of work, that is my 3-step process. Initially from the very first get-go, identifying a theme, and also just looking back at photos, seeing what works and what doesn't. Again, if there's a theme that you really, really want to photograph, go for it. That's great. But if you're stuck and you don't know what theme you're going to be shooting, a good idea would just be to look back at your photos and see if there's any consistent patterns. Then that goes into execution, setting yourself a specific timeline for you to finish this body of work. Because what you don't want to do is say, I'm going to create this body of work. We're going to be photographing crosswalks, and I have no end time to do this. Because once you give yourself some structure, you notice that you're going to be going out there to do this more. And when there's a deadline, it also kind of saves you from wasting your time or just losing overall momentum and motivation, because I think that's a big thing. A lot of people start, but they never finish. And it's all about how you finish, folks. And then lastly, after executing, obviously the last one is just sequencing, figuring out how you're going to mesh certain photos together or how you're going to present this to the world. And this is probably the most intimate part of the process because, yeah, you are making the photographs. Yeah, you are thinking of the theme. But if there's one place where your input matters the most, it's in the sequencing aspect of everything. Making sure that the body of work that you are about to put out into the world looks good in your eyes before it does in anyone else's. And at the end of the day, folks, if your body of work comes out to 800 photos, then it comes out to 800 photos. Be proud of it. You have just made an extensive body of work with your own idea, with your own time and your own photography gear. You went out there and you did this thing. And it's very rewarding to be able to create bodies of work because it's something that you can always refer back to, whether that be talking with friends or even doing things like books, zines, exhibitions, all of that stuff. And, if you can go out today and create a body of work, even if it's something as small as 10 photos, that is amazing because you're giving yourself more purpose in your photography. And if that's something that you're into, it can really, really set the foundation for your photography moving forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Like I said, this one was not going to be super long, but I still wanted to put some information out there. Hopefully you guys pulled, something useful out of this one. But let me know down in the comment section below new podcast ideas, what you guys want to hear me talk about, but also comment on the names that you guys want to name the podcast. Like I said, the suggestions in the beginning were all solid names, but I'm here to really just open my ears and see what you guys like. So thank you guys for tuning into this week's episode of the Blank Podcast. You guys can find me over on Instagram, here on YouTube, or on TikTok now at King Japes. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Oh wait, I gotta say Minolta Gang.